Welcome to Deep Pockets, the podcast for exploring how basic science, once created in a lab and funded by public means, is fueling the economy with completely new private industries. Deep Pockets is created by Petra Soderling.
It's common knowledge that Internet, a connected network of computers communicating via TCP/IP, is a result of the U.S. Department of Defense-funded research in the 1960s, resulting in what was called ARPANET. It is also widely known that English scientist Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1989 while employed at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. What followed after, how the web became what it is today, has received less attention. In 2001, Tim Berners-Lee, James Hendler, and Ora Lassila published a paper in the Scientific American called The Semantic Web. Scientific American is not a lightweight publication. Founded in 1845, it has published articles from people such as Albert Einstein, and it is the oldest continuously published monthly magazine in the United States. This paper, The Semantic Web, argued that a new form of web content that is meaningful for computers will unleash a revolution of new possibilities. Today's guest is Dr. Ora Lassila, one of the three co-authors of this paper. Welcome to Deep Pockets, Ora.
Thank you very much.
Before going into Semantic Web, I'm going to have to ask you, how did the three of you get together?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So I guess sort of the culmination, in a way, sort of things that led to the Semantic Web happened in 1996 when I was working at MIT. But before that, when I was working at Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s, I met Jim Hendler in a DARPA-funded program. So DARPA is the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, and we were working on ontologies, and I'll come back to what an ontology is, but suffices to say it's a rich data model at this point. And so I knew Jim from before, and then in '96 I went to work at MIT, and I worked at Tim Berners-Lee's group, the World Wide Web Consortium, which was headquartered at MIT. And one day, Tim comes to my office and says, so, Ora, what do you think is wrong with the web? And of course, this is a little bit of an intimidating question considering who is asking. And I said, well, Tim, the web was built for humans, and human interpretation is needed for kind of making the content meaningful in some sense. And that makes it hard to automate anything. I want automation and I want autonomous agents. And so Tim gets really excited and goes like, that's it. That is wrong with the web. How do we solve this? And I'm like, I don't know. I've been working on knowledge representation and ontologies for many years, so maybe we could see if we could apply knowledge representation in the context of the web. And he gets very, very excited, and he says, good, please look into this. And to me, this is the point where sort of Semantic Web gets started in a way. And after a couple of years of work in that area, and we found a lot of people from other institutions who were also looking into something like this, and we got all those people together and decided that we were going to have to do something together, and then maybe that leads into a standard or something like that. And so one of the groups we found was that Jim Hendler's group at University of Maryland had been looking into this. And then subsequently, Jim became a program manager in a DARPA program that was called the DARPA Agent Markup Language. And that's obviously a misnomer, but it was Jim's sort of a strategic invention of nomenclature, because DARPA and the Department of Defense, they were very interested in agents. And if he had said semantic web, we probably would not have created as much buzz as this other term did. But the DARPA Agent Markup Language Program, or DAML, really was DARPA's take on the semantic web. And then Jim calls me one day and says, "Hey, we really should write something about this so that more people would find out about the semantic web." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's write something." And then he had spoken with some folks at Scientific American, and found out basically that the Scientific American was interested in publishing an article in this, and we started writing this. And then at some point, maybe halfway through the writing process, we thought, well, maybe we'll invite Tim as well, because he has name recognition, and maybe it would be a good idea. And so then the three of us got together a few times. Tim's office at MIT, and we drew a lot on the whiteboard and stuff like that. And there was a lot of writing over, I don't know, maybe a period of 8 months, 9 months, something like that. The funny thing about this, the outcome then, is that when the article was published, not only did Scientific American make it the cover story, which we had not anticipated, but Scientific American has a policy that authors' names are alphabetized, regardless of who is the lead author. And thus this is Berners-Lee, Hendler, and Lassila, which I'm sure irritated Jim quite a bit. I mean, I was just happy to get published. But of course, now forever this article is referred to as Berners-Lee et al. So, nevertheless, the article created quite a bit of buzz when it came out, both good and bad in some ways. I mean, a lot of people got excited, and then a lot of people accused us of being science fiction authors, things like that. So that was roughly 20 years ago.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of big science and tech words. I think we need to back up a little bit on the, like, what is semantic web, the basics. So what did you mean by semantic web being its new form of web content?
Sure, yeah. So if you think about kind of quote-unquote traditional web content, which is funny that we can now say traditional, but nevertheless, it really is content that is meant for humans. Pages that you read, pictures that you look at. And more so when you go back 20 years or more than 20 years, that's really what the web was about. It was text and pictures, and in order for that information to be meaningful in any sense, you basically needed a human to interpret that content somehow. Now, of course, someone will now say, well, now we have natural language processing and all that stuff. Well, of course, we're gonna maybe talk about that in a little bit, but the direction where we wanted to go was to create content that was structured in such a way that it could be interpreted by machines because it had clearly defined meaning. And this question of meaning or semantics is a very tricky one in AI and computer science in general. And ever since the 1960s, there's been an effort within AI research called knowledge representation, which basically aims at structuring information in such a way that machines can infer things from it and draw conclusions from it. And this information is typically structured by way of these things we call ontologies. Okay, so now, of course, people who went to the university and studied philosophy, they go like, what the heck is that guy talking about? But in computer science, we have sort of hijacked the term ontology. We don't necessarily exactly mean metaphysics by it, but even though we're not necessarily that far from it, but the essence is that an ontology is a rich description of a data model. It's like a description of a domain of discourse, if you will. And an ontology identifies the concepts that you talk about, the relationships between these concepts, and it may identify logical conditions that have to hold in that particular domain. And then once you have information structured using an ontology, you can then use reasoning to draw conclusions. So basically uncover things that are implicit in your data but not explicit. So let me give you an example of sort of a most trivial possible example of what reasoning is. So let's say in my data I have this thing. Let's call him Felix, and we say Felix is a cat. And then we also say that cats are mammals. So now, implicit in this information, by way of some reasoning rules, is that Felix is a mammal. Because Felix is a cat and cats are mammals, and we can infer that Felix is a mammal. Now, this is, of course, an incredibly trivial example, but this is basically what reasoning is about. You can kind of either uncover implicit information, or you can find out things that are not possible. So, for example, we can say things like we have cats and we have dogs, and we can say, well, the set of cats is disjoint with the set of dogs. It means that no one thing can be both a cat and a dog. This would be one of those logical constraints in an ontology. And so if you now find out that something is a cat, you can also conclude that it's not a dog by way of this. Or if you find something that is a cat and a dog, you can conclude that there's something wrong with your data. In the semantic web, we basically took this kind of technology, and mind you, this technology has been studied at least since the 1960s. We took this technology and we basically said, well, can we apply this in the context of the web? And maybe even more importantly, we said, can we build support for this kind of technology using existing web technologies? Why web technologies? Well, web technologies are ubiquitous, they're well understood, they're well supported. And if we think about this, our initial motivation, which was to build these what we call autonomous agents, which had been studied in computer science for quite some time, these would be software entities that basically would act on your behalf and maybe could move from one place to another and do things for you. The good news here is that web technologies, by way of being so ubiquitous, enable these kinds of things to be built easier, because HTTP goes through firewalls and provides basically this ubiquitous connectivity. And this is what people, not only in the agent community, but also in the knowledge representation community, have been asking for a very long time. So can we have universal connectivity, and can we have things that we can share, ontologies we can share, and data we can share? And the semantic web would have provided all those things. this is basically what we had in mind, that there would be this data, that you could access this data, you could share it over the web, and then whatever software you had could then draw conclusions from that and do things for you or on your behalf. And now we come to sort of an important distinction about this question of autonomy and an autonomous agent. So software and information systems throughout the history that we've had computers have been like tools. Think of a hammer. A hammer is an extremely handy tool, but it won't build you a house. You still kind of have to swing your arm, but a hammer makes it a lot easier to pound nails into the wall rather than using your plain fist. So what we had in mind was that we would be moving away from the sort of tool paradigm towards something that ultimately might culminate in something like the information systems equivalent of a building contractor. So a building contractor is someone you tell, okay, I want a house, can you build it for me? And then the contractor goes and builds it for you. Unlike a hammer, which requires you to actually do the work in order to get the house built. So this is sort of one of those, I'm hesitant to use the word paradigm shift, but I'm doing it anyway. Something that kind of moves things to a completely new way of doing things, new realm. That's kind of what we had in mind when we were writing this article. And of course, because we were describing things that happen in this way, people then accused us of being science fiction authors and describing all kinds of things that were not really possible. And but I think that a lot of the things we said in that article became true very quickly. And now, after 20 years, really a vast majority of the things that we said has become true. The thing that hasn't happened is the sort of massive global kind of adoption of this technology, which would have made this kind of data kind of widely available. Now, that said, we have a lot of data structured using the mechanisms of the semantic web. We built standards for representing this kind of data, and there's been a lot of uptake in these standards. And in fact, chances are you are using semantic web technologies every day. You just don't know it. It's a little bit like AI. People say, "Oh, this AI new thing." Well, we've used AI for a very long time. I think this is sort of generally a kind of a funny phenomenon in our industry. We talk about new things, and then we realize that things actually aren't new. In many ways, let's take AI and semantic web as an example. So AI has been around since the 1950s, and we've studied AI since the 1950s. Ontologies we've studied in computer science at least since the 1960s, but we've known since the year 1900 that ontologies are a good vehicle for formal representation of information, thanks to the philosopher Edmund Husserl. And ontologies are often structured as graphs. Now, graph theory has been part of mathematics since the late 18th century. And then this sort of new AI, machine learning and all that, well, that's in a way that's sort of fancy application of statistics. And we've known how to do statistics for a long time. And in fact, nobody calls them statistician anymore. They call themselves data scientists or something like that. But it's still the same technology in many ways. Okay, so now a lot of people are screaming now. It's like, what is that guy talking about? But I'm not wrong. about
Yeah,
this.
I think, it caught my eye when you said it's this agent acting on your behalf. So that's your vision came true. The web is now semantic, and it is what you envisioned. You wanted the web to be designed for computers and not for humans. And many would argue that it's too far now. The web is designed for computers, especially computers working for advertisers. And it's too computer driven.
Well, there is that, of course, and yeah. So this is, of course, true, and in some ways, I'm sure many people feel that that in a way they've sort of lost control, or there's some kind of partial loss of control over what's happening, and then, of course, with this come all these sort of doomsday scenarios about AI. And I don't know why these doomsday scenarios tend to come from people who are not AI researchers, but are doing something else. I mean, I know there's many physicists have weighed in on this. Stephen Hawking weighed in on this, Roger Penrose, who I think, I'm not sure if he was Hawking's thesis advisor. He already in the 90s weighed against AI, and I think Elon Musk has had some kind of doomsday scenarios about AI. And I think that this, honestly, my feeling is that only people who have not participated in large-scale software projects would make predictions like this, because when you think about software, it's damn right a miracle that anything works, and so the Skynet is not happening. Skynet from Terminator, the machines are not taking over. This is not happening. So now, of course, the part of the concern about AI is this sort of ethical use of AI and all that, and I understand those concerns. They're real concerns, but those concerns are not new. Those concerns have always existed when it comes to technology. What is the ethical use of technology? And no matter what the technology is, somebody can dream up some unethical, quote unquote, way of using that technology. In fact, when I was interviewed about 20 years ago about the semantic web by the magazine New Scientist, and the interviewer asked me about the sort of the possible negative uses of the semantic web technology, and my answer at the time was, and it is the same answer today, is that almost any technology can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And so I'm not entirely sure it's the technology's fault how something is used. And in many ways, when you look at the development of technologies, there are it's mostly bad things that drive technology development. The war, for example, drives technology like nothing else, and the other thing that drives technology is vice. So in some ways, maybe there is no good without the bad. I don't know, but I'm not going to get into the philosophy of this.
So, some people might say that the web works extremely well and it's anticipated. If I want to buy new shoes, it's going to advertise shoes for me immediately, like before I can even think about it. But then, on the other hand, sometimes it doesn't work. You have this example, the medical example in this semantic web paper where a mother is ill and the children need to find a doctor. I actually had a real case, like 20 years later, a real world case where because I recently moved to a new city, I needed to find a new general physician for an annual checkup. And I ran web searches for a general physician who is near me, accepts my insurance policy, and accepts new patients. So that's 3 different attributes. And I got a lot of hits on doctors near me, driving distance, but none of the results, well, at least none of the first 10 results were about the insurance or about if they're accepting new patients. So my question to you that do you think that these so-called codeless platforms or no-code platforms would solve this problem? And I mean that in my case, the various doctors' offices would all use these simple web tools and sort of enable the insurance policy and the accepting new patients as searchable attributes.
Well, I mean, it's a nice idea. Personally, generally speaking, I don't believe in this no-code idea at all. There is no such thing as no-code. There's always code, and the person who tells the computer what to do is called a programmer. And whether you were trained as a programmer or not is a separate question. But these, for me, I mean, let's put it this way: the scenario you describe is a good one. There are things you can do by way of configuring rather than by way of programming. And those are of course perfectly possible. I'm not entirely sure if that's what we mean by low code or no code. But obviously we can imagine a tool that would allow medical providers to accurately describe what it is that they do and under the conditions they can do it and all that. And so we can imagine a scenario like that. But then, of course, the funny thing is that then there are obstacles to this, like market economy and sort of commercial entrepreneurship is actually an obstacle for this, because everybody, now we have competing attempts to do these kinds of things. And oftentimes the things that we would really like about information systems, such as interoperability and the ability for these systems to exchange information with one another, are often things that don't easily happen in a market-driven scenario. And I don't mean to sound cynical, but I think that that's one of those things that well, we realized that, and I learned this after working in a venture capital firm for a while, is that unless somebody's making money off a technology, that technology is not going to happen. And now we have a lot of these technologies that would be extremely useful, but we cannot really describe a good way for somebody to make money off them. And I think that so Semantic Web is largely predicated on the idea of interoperability. Semantic Web, in fact, is a technology that promotes interoperability and interchange of information between different parties. But it's hard to put a price tag on interoperability. It's like, how much would you pay for interoperability? Because somebody's going to come and ask, well, does that allow me to sell more stuff? Well, in some cases it does, but it's hard to kind of find the direct link. These are sort of indirect benefits of the technology, and people are more interested in the direct benefits because they can kind of put a price tag on. Okay, I'm willing to pay this much for that because my bottom line is going to get improved by this much and all that. So I think that this is one of those things that well, I don't have a good answer for that. Interoperability would be nice. How do we achieve it? People have to want it, and oftentimes the sort of the distance from the actual interoperability technology to what people perceive as is the behavior of an information system is too long. Okay, so let's come back to this no code, low code part that you suggested. So let's say that a medical provider can actually configure their system and can provide information about what it is that they're doing. This is a great idea. But how do we make it happen? Who is the kind of arbiter of this information, or the broker of this information? I mean, in a way, sort of the way things ended up happening on the web is that the original idea of the fully decentralized web, in a way, got bastardized a little bit. And now we have sort of large technology companies that can, in some ways, control the dissemination of information on the web. We have we have search engine companies, and we have the social media platforms. And in many ways, these companies, what they do in a way sort of works against the idea of fully distributed, fully decentralized web, because in the original scenario, anybody could have been a publisher. Anybody could have provided information about whatever. But we have now these kind of gatekeepers for that. I mean, technically it's still possible, obviously, but in practice and in financial terms, it may not be that easy.
Let's talk about standards. It sounds to me like you're arguing for standards and against standards at the same time. You, of course, yourself were writing specifications at W3C, or maybe still are, I don't know. There are adjacent standards that affect the outcome of how we use the web or how the web uses us. In this paper 20 years ago, you were talking about, for example, Sun Microsystems Genie for locating services. There was Microsoft Plug and Play for locating devices. And many of us at that time who were working with standards, we saw standards as some kind of utopia for the future. But now today I live in my house. It's a pretty smart house, but I can only control some things with my Alexa and some things with my iPhone, and I cannot control my Alexa with my iPhone or vice versa. So
Right.
did the standards fail or did they not fail?
Well, no, I mean, this is an example of standards not being deployed. I mean, this is we have sort of, in some ways, we have moved into this kind of post-standardization scenario. Standards are a great idea. And we've had standards for a very long time in many different areas of life. The semantic web standards that we ended up creating, and the most fundamental of these is called RDF, so the fundamental representation standard. What we did there is that rather than doing what all standards pretty much had done before that, which is saying, here's what you say, and here's what these things that you say, here's what they mean. So we decided we're not going to do that. We're in fact going to say, this is how you can say things to communicate what things mean. Which basically means that we didn't standardize what to say. We standardized how to say it. And our thinking at the time was that then this would allow sort of a kind of delayed commitment to semantics or meaning of things. You could actually build things, and then the definition of semantics wouldn't have to exist before you start building something. Now what has happened, and now I have to come back to my earlier comment about the sort of the gatekeepers and large companies. So in some ways, we have moved into a situation where standards, the official standards, play less of a role in the world of technology. And it's more sort of a question is, what is it that you manage to deploy? You get your technology deployed, now that is the standard, right? And in fact, some of the things we mentioned in that article 20 years ago were not really standards in the sense that there would have been some kind of a wide industry agreement that yes, these are the technologies we want to use, but it was more, they were more like one company's kind of attempt to build a framework or a platform where certain things could happen. And if you have enough sort of if you have wide enough user base, let's say, then you can build. It's like a what's the word that people use? It's like an ecosystem, right? So you have technology that a lot of people use, and you build it in such a way that other people can contribute to that, so they can build their own products that work with your product. And in a way, you've now managed to deploy a standard. It's not what we traditionally call a standard, but that's how it works. Now, it's unfortunate that the world is sort of, in a way, the world has sort of split into a few different kinds of things. I mean, we've for a long time we've had the Mac versus Windows. We've had iPhones versus Android. So these are sort of the way the world has kind of cleaved in half.
So, but you said we're doing less standards. Does that mean that we're being less innovative and we're doing less new things? We're just applying and creating solutions of things already invented.
Well, I mean, that is an excellent question, because I think that the sort of the question of innovation is a tricky one when it comes to standardization. I mean, many people see standardization actually a hindrance to innovation, because standards traditionally have, well, there's been like two ways to build a standard. Either you say this is what the world looks like, and it will not look any different than this, no matter what you do going forward. So you have to kind of conform to this particular standard. Or you say, we have managed to anticipate all possible scenarios about the future, and this is the great standard that we have crafted for you, which is a highly unrealistic scenario, right? So in a way, sort of standards have always been seen as restrictive. You have to restrict something so that everybody kind of conforms to something, so that we get the kind of the economies of scale and the critical mass for things. What happened, if we look at what happened in the 90s and then the early 2000s, is I think we saw a fundamental shift in how standards are done. So it used to be that standards were seen as something like, hey, let's standardize these so we can then all play. And I think that in the last couple of decades, we've seen standards move more towards a situation where, like, well, let's see if we could write this standard in such a way that we can kind of screw our competition. And so when a long time ago, when I was working at Nokia Research, the head of Nokia Research, Professor Juhani Kuusi, would always describe that the proper way to do standardization, that it was like a cake. And standardization is what you do when you want to make the cake as big as possible. And then competition decides how large of a slice of that cake you're going to get. And he always saw standardization as a sort of a means of actually building a market, building an industry, that then later on competition would be used to decide who gets which piece of that cake, so to speak.
Yeah, we're talking about software, but I can't help thinking of semiconductors while you're talking. So if I'm using semiconductor as a standard, which it's not, but it's kind of a defined platform that people can use for building things. But the actual industry for semiconductors has remained small. In a way, you don't have a lot of competition in semiconductors. They're pretty similar. Only a few companies in the world make them. So in that sense, the semiconductor would fuel innovation, but not in the semiconductor industry, but in other industries.
That is a really interesting thought, and in the sense that in order for innovation to happen somewhere else, there has needed to be consolidation, sort of intellectually speaking, consolidation in another industry to build a platform that has the scale so that innovation is possible somewhere else. That's an interesting thought. I mean, we really thought in the early years of the Semantic Web that what we would do is that we would really build these mechanisms that would let then other people use these technologies other things, for innovating new things. And I think that what ended up happening is that maybe the semantic web didn't exactly happen just like we describe in that article. I mean, many of those things did happen, but maybe the full-blown scenario did not happen. But the semantic web technologies laid the groundwork for modern knowledge graphs, which everybody now wants to do, and nobody actually remembers that's where they come from. We're still using the semantic web standards, though.
Yeah, this is my final question about the future. The 2001 Scientific American article, Semantic Web, ends in a paragraph, Evolution of Knowledge. You claim that semantic web can assist the evolution of human knowledge as a whole, and the premise is that human endeavor is caught in an eternal tension between the effectiveness of small groups acting independently and the need to mesh with the wider community. I could not help thinking about the prevalence of misinformation and small isolated clicks in the web feeding off of a spiral of malicious content through what you refer as these self-acting agents. Mm-hmm. So how do you see the web evolve going forward, and what's your personal role in that?
Right. I mean, I have to admit we did not think about the misinformation in the scale that it exists today when we were writing that. Although I remember somebody asked me in an interview soon after the article was published, asked me sort of imagine scenarios where one could actually do harm using the semantic web technologies. And the thing I thought about at the time was was the idea of what I call the semantic virus, which would have been the insertion of a logical inconsistency into a corpus of data, which would then let you prove anything, including things that are not true. Now, let's come back to this question of evolution of human knowledge. I mean, I think that the semantic web, in many ways, the way we imagined it, it was like a team sport. You could not play alone. Those technologies did not make any sense if you were doing them, but nobody else was doing them. Those technologies only made sense if everybody was playing, or if a large group of people were playing. And in that kind of a scenario, what we thought would happen is that we could now start sharing information, not the way we traditionally shared information, just like exchange of files and then somebody has to interpret them, but really to make information accessible in a way that you not only get the physical bits, but you also get a definition of what that information means. And in that kind of a scenario, I could imagine that we could do a lot of good because we can now share information with less friction. And I think that in some ways this has become true of many fields where large amounts of information are needed. So, for example, like research in the medical or pharmaceutical fields. Today we need very, very large amounts of information to make progress. And we need the ability to share information like that, and not just the bits, like I said. I mean, you need to be able to actually share the information in such a way that the recipient actually understands what that information is about. I often have this like a thought experiment that I tell people to do. So let's say you have some large corpus of information and you stick it in let's say an Excel spreadsheet, and you put some what you think are reasonably good labels on each of the columns of the spreadsheet. Then you put this spreadsheet on a USB stick and you bury it into the ground and you leave it there for 100 years. And so somebody digs it up after 100 years, and now let's assume that they can still read USB sticks, and they can actually read an Excel document. the 100 years guarantees that nobody who was involved in creating that information is alive anymore. So there's nobody to ask. And so now that person who dug the USB stick out of the ground looks at the data and what are the chances that he will be able to interpret that data in a way that makes it possible for him to use that data? I think that the probability for that is fairly low. And we've seen examples of, even with, we don't need 100 years for that. We've seen examples where people misinterpret data because simply the meaning of that data is not communicated with the data. So it's this question of communicating the meaning that was at the forefront of our minds when we kind of made this ambitious claim about the evolution of human knowledge.
Bringing meaningfulness to web.
That's it.
Dr. Ora Lassila, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Sure. Happy to do it. Thank you very much.
You've listened to Deep Pockets by Petra Soderling. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes.